Welcome back to The Mentors.
This is Vadim.
And Sergey.
And this is a show where we tell stories of ordinary people that became extraordinary entrepreneurs despite lack of experience, money, or connections.
And today we are back with the third edition of our Scaling Mentorship series. So if you're just tuning in for the first time, a couple months ago we decided to do essentially an event series where we thought, hey, let's reach out to executives at large companies and see if they will let us interview them in front of their employees and put it on the podcast. And so we wanted to find out, how do people go from, being just an employee at a company or an individual contributor to actually rising through the ranks and running, let's say, a multi-million, or in some cases, like our story with Becky Frankowitz, which was episode 114, where this is a woman that at a fairly young age is running a multi-billion-dollar company. And so we uncover exactly how that got there, and it's in front of a live studio audience. And if you were wondering about how we got that interview with Becky Frankowitz of Manpower Group, or the week before that of Andrew Glincher of Nixon Peabody, which is a multi-thousand person national law firm, we actually got that through one of our PR contacts at Havas PR, which is a major global public relations firm. And for this week's episode, we got a chance to sit down with the CEO of that PR firm, who talked to us about exactly how he rose through the ranks of being, again, somebody that joined a public relations firm at an entry level right after college to actually in his 20s getting a managing director title and ultimately running one of the larger PR firms in the country. This is a very interesting conversation about not only how to grow a career in PR or how to gain an executive position at a PR agency, but actually how this person hustled to get clients, to get to a point where they were recognized as a leader and then capitalized on that to get new opportunities. And then if you're a founder also that's interested in understanding where PR is going, the second half of the conversation talks about the future of PR and how Havas, actually, which is now known as Red Havas, is helping lead the way of that future. Please enjoy our conversation with James Wright, CEO of Red Havas.
Okay, we're going to get started. You guys ready? Yeah. Cool. We'll do our little intro so you know we're actually really in it. Cool. All right. Welcome back to
The Mentors.
This is Vadim.
And Sergey.
And this is a show where we tell stories of ordinary people that became extraordinary entrepreneurs and leaders despite lack of experience, money, or connections. Okay, so today on the show, we have James Wright, Global CEO of Red Havas. And he has an incredible story for how he came to be in this position now. And you just moved to New York, how long ago?
January, so 5 months ago.
Well, welcome to New York. But you're originally from London, right? Or from the UK?
From the UK, yeah.
And then you spent a lot of time in London.
Yeah.
And in the pre-interview, we talked to James and we heard about a little bit about his origin story, which of course you guys will all hear throughout this interview. But I wanted to start at the very beginning. I know that you come from a family that ran a farm 120 years, which even if anyone of us knows anybody that's a farmer, 120 years is a very long time. And I know that also in your family, it was normal for somebody else in the family to take over the farm and continue to run it. And it could have been you, but it happened to be that it was your brother. And so then you went the other track, and I guess the corporate track. And you spent a couple of years in agencies, but eventually by 26 years old, you became managing director at a large agency in the UK. So talk us through that time after college. Obviously ended up being great that you were in a position where you didn't have to run the farm, fortunately, and you were then placed to do this. But what do you think separated you or made you a little bit different or even positioned you to then be thrust into that leadership role at a very young age?
I think growing up in a family business, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about what's happening, I guess, in the real world when, your father's bringing back sort of the accounts from the day and money becomes a real kind of everyday conversation piece. And so you sort of understand the ins and outs of that. And I always grew up having to sort of work on the farm and do tasks around that. And I think therefore then you sort of take that sort of knowledge and experience of working hard. You come back from school, you do stuff, you do work at the weekends, you'd help out all the time. And so you're in this constant sort of cycle of doing things, which I actually thought, I was a very curious person, so I kind of learned a lot around that. So when I decided that, because my brother was older, I definitely didn't want to work for him. I decided I was going to give it a go and go to college and university, and I became the first person in my extended family to go to university, and still to this day I'm the only person that's done that. And other people within my family group have been successful in other ways, in sports or in their own sort of businesses that they've gone on to start. So it's all different for different people. But, you know, I had a real desire and determination to try and be the best I could be at what I was doing. And my uncle at the time was quite senior in marketing in a big DIY company, a big national DIY company in the UK. And I really liked what he was doing. He was always doing something fun. And I thought, you know, that could be really interesting to get into. And so I researched it. I did a bit of an internship with him and then kind of went off to university and studied. And then I decided that was it. I'm going to go in and every day be a better version of the person I was the day before.
And what is a DIY company, just to clarify?
It was called Wilkinson's DIY.
Okay.
He was the CMO. And ironically, his name was Wilkinson, Paul Wilkinson. But he wasn't part of the family that owned the DIY company, even though every time he turned up at an event, everyone thought he owned it, which he took advantage of, I think, with various free tickets to glamorous events.
Interesting. So obviously growing up on the farm set you up to be a hard worker. Actually, Sergey and our dad put us to work at a small business at 11 years old, which of course some labor laws would say that was very legal. But we were just helping out dad. He wasn't paying us. He did help pay through college, so he came back and helped out later. But we ended up working at that business from 11 through 24?
In a shopping mall, and we would go back during the busy seasons and help out throughout, even into our late 20s, yeah.
But at 11 years old, we were negotiating with vendors, and because our dad's English wasn't very good, we're from Belarus, and he only spoke Russian, really. And so whenever the tough conversations had to happen, we had to do it. And it is a very formative experience. But for you, you know, yes, you were a hard worker. Yes, you were incrementally trying to improve all the time after college, and you realized that was important to stand out. But how was it in those 4 years before you got that opportunity to be a managing director? I think you were going from agency to agency, right, getting more and more experience, but what were you doing then?
Actually, I started at the same agency, but the agency was then evolved. It got bought by a big PR group, and by that point, I was already starting to move through the ranks. I think a lot of it was about showing initiative. I think that you can really pull yourself out of the pack if you're doing more than you're being asked to do, or you're suggesting, recommending things that you think the business should be doing. And so, you know, I was always the first to put my hand up to do other stuff to help and support on new business pitches. Just really, I wanted to get as much experience as I could and also kind of tap into the knowledge of the people around me. And I was very, very fortunate that I had a fantastic group of senior leadership around me who really allowed me to do that and allowed me to develop. And over time, I ended up being some of their bosses. And so it was an interesting sort of dynamic. And yet, I remember reflecting on a conversation with one of them who said that actually if anyone was going to do what you're doing, it was you, because you were so much more advanced than those people around you at that age. Now, aren't necessarily words I would have used to describe myself, but I was just trying to do as much as I could and learn as much as I could. And then I think a big part of that, and particularly when you start off in agency land, is all about your contacts and networks and the clients trusting you and people in the industry trusting you. So when I got to know my clients, I really made an effort to get to know them, not just professionally, but personally, and go that extra mile with them. You know, I'd go to football matches with them. I'd go out for a beer. I'd get to know what sort of their passions were. And two things then happened. One is that they then often started migrating to me with briefings, even though actually they should have been going to somebody more senior on the team. And secondly, they started spending more money with us because actually they had other work in other agencies that they started to give to us and trusting me, if you like, to start to manage their business. And once you start to become really important to your agency like that, you start to get given more responsibility because naturally the client is doing that anyway. So it's a natural step for your agency to do so.
Well, that's interesting. Can you give us an example of how you did that? I want to understand a little bit more about your process, because I understand that networking is important and I understand that knowing your client deeply is important. But when you came to work on a Monday and you had, let's say, maybe a client list in front of you, how did you execute against that list? I mean, especially for the folks in that room or anybody listening to the show that is in PR, interested in being in PR, if they want to accelerate their career that quickly, what do you actually tactically do to make sure that you win business and you get those briefings instead of somebody else, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I would come in very early, particularly in the UK. I was in at work every day at 7. And I'd want to be researching, reading what was happening in the industry of my clients so that I could actually then have a conversation with them first thing as soon as they got through the door about things that happened either through the weekend news or what was happening and broken that morning on a Monday morning. And then even if it was nothing to do with the briefs that we had, but looking at what their business problems were and the challenges that they had in their industry. And then, you know, just the fact that I'd taken an interest was different to a lot of other people who were they would see as just service providers, you became a genuine partner. And then starting, as you got to know that industry, thinking of ways in which they could resolve that. And a big client I had was BT, which is the formerly British Telecom, was the big telecoms business there. It was going through a huge transition during the 2000s when I was working for them. And I worked for them from the day I walked through the door to the day I left the UK in 2011, and that business had followed me the entire time.
Wow.
And working on that. And they were going from a transition from a telecoms business to a comms business. They were getting into digital music, they were getting into streaming and sports and entertainment, had very big relationships with, PlayStation. And it was a real fascinating period because it's like this huge monolith kind of business that was trying to, redefine itself and its purpose. So that was a fascinating business to work on, and I got to know it really, really well. And I used to know more people in that business than the client because I just over time been working there for so long and got to know it that I knew all of these different parts. I mean, this was a business at one time I had 120,000 people working for it in the UK.
Wow.
That's huge. So knowing different people, and I'd get phone calls from, the client wasn't just one person; it was a number of people who would ask me if I knew somebody in different parts of their group. And then I guess it was awesome because one of the, greatest accolades I had was that when they asked me to write their Company of the Year awards for a big sort of global business awards piece, which is run by the Prince of Wales. And they went on to win that. But it's a huge dissertation that you write about all of their impacts on the community. It's called the Business and the Community Awards. And the fact that they asked me to write that because I knew everything about what they were doing in the community because that was a large part of the briefs that we had. They wouldn't normally give that. They give other awards to write for the agency, but not one that was purely about their business and understanding their business and getting access to information that they wouldn't normally give to their agencies.
Interesting. And how old were you at this point?
25.
25. So then, very young. I think one of the things that stood out for me is, and especially for the young folks that are listening that are graduating right now, for example, but even people that are early in their careers, early on, especially for us, I mean, you feel like you join companies and, all right, tell me what to do. I'll do it, and I'll try to do a great job. But really, the way that you stand out and progress and grow, and you realize the way that you create value in any role, or even a startup that you join, let's say, is by taking initiative, solving problems, and doing things that other people aren't doing. Because ultimately, that's what is going to accelerate you at a young age, like you did. And then, so a year after this, you got another opportunity as a managing director. Talk about that story. Would you say that was a pivotal moment in your career?
Well, I'd started so BT had become a huge client at this point. They'd kind of consolidated work into our business. I was working on a number of other clients. I had very, very large global clients. We were working for Coke, we were working for McDonald's, we were working for HSBC, for Sony. And, I'd actually sort of started to forge the creation of a sort of division that was focused mainly on sustainability and cause. And four big businesses. So we had the HSBC Climate Partnership. We had the work that Sony was doing on technology and how technology can improve the lives that we lead. Same thing that was going for BT, where they were very much focused on helping people. They were a communications company, helping young people in their communication skills at an early age. What I said to the group was, well, actually, I think we should create this as a specialist division globally. I think we should have a division that focuses on this. So they allowed me to set it up because I wrote a business plan. They didn't ask me to. I wrote a business plan, and they gave me then. At that point, then they'd given me I was at that. I think it was an executive director at that point, which was before we created these MD roles. The business changed a few times. Mm-hmm. So I was at that level, and I was a good 10 years younger than anyone else that was at that level at the time. But I was kind of creating it, and I think I've been very fortunate in all of the business I've worked with is that they're very entrepreneurial minded, and I find that often if you go with an idea, it makes sense, and you've given a lot of thought to it. If your bosses trust you, they'll give you the chance to do it. I mean, they also give you enough rope to hang yourself. But, fortunately, been able to be very successful at that. And then we went to and won a huge piece of business with Jaguar Land Rover, and that business started to evolve globally and go much more into sort of outside of the environmental issues that they were facing at the time, as the Land Rovers and Range Rovers were being called Chelsea tractors. There was a lot of aggressive NGO action towards the automotive manufacturers to improve how they were building and running their cars and trucks, etc. And I guess that then we became kind of the go-to organisation, and then that built because we started doing product PR and other parts of their business and retail and their dealerships, and because suddenly then I had two of the biggest clients in the global network, that were under my portfolio, it was just a natural, naturally that they then made me the MD.
And when you say you won that piece of business, because we've talked about this, I think, in the last 3 weeks a couple of times, one of the ways that you make waves in an organization and get leadership positions is by bringing in business, bringing in revenue.
Yeah.
How did you win that particular piece of business?
We just went, I think, further than the other agencies. You know, we really got under the skin of that business. And when I moved to Australia, we won Toyota with the same type of approach, which was to leave no stone unturned and be willing to tell the client what they really need to hear, to hold a mirror up to their business and say, this is the issues you're facing. Not just go and tell them what you think they want to hear, but actually what the reality is. So we went and spoke to a whole range of different stakeholders who were interacting with that business, not just sort of journalists, but other businesses that were suppliers. That we went into dealerships to shop people in dealerships, to hear what people were saying about that, and also in competitor dealerships. We pretended we were from a university and we were doing a research project, but ways in which you can find information out from people that can build a strategy that you want to present to a client.
Now, I do want to hear that side of the story of what happened once you moved to Australia. But before I ask that question, when you got the managing director role, how many people at that point did you have reporting to you?
We had directly probably about 14 or 15, but we're a team of about 900 around the world.
Wow.
It was a big agency group, and we've grown hugely during that time. I mean, the agency that it was when I joined as an entry-level graduate was probably 40 people. Mm-hmm. We were then bought in 2005 by a big group called Huntsworth, which was bigger, and they merged a whole range of their businesses into an agency that became called Grayling. Mm-hmm. And we were 900 people. We were doing huge growth, fantastic profitability, and it was an agency really on the move during the sort of time that I became MD and then the time I left the business.
And how does that, when you're 26 years old and you get an opportunity to manage people for the first time, I mean, even 14, 15 people, that can be pretty intimidating if you've never done it before. How did it feel to jump right into it? What were some of the first things that you did to get comfortable with that role?
It's strange. I found it quite natural to me, and a lot of those people were a lot older than me. It felt, maybe it was the arrogance of it at the time, but I felt like it was, I deserved it because I'd worked really hard and I'd got the relationships, and I felt like, I should be in that position, or given the opportunity to be in that position. Or at least I thought that until then they gave me it. And then the reality set in. But, I've always found it very easy to change the way I am with different people. I think I've got good soft skills around understanding how to get the best out of people. And I think a lot of that comes from sports. I played a lot of sports throughout my life growing up and often ended up, captaining sports teams. And there's a lot of the way in which you manage people that you can take it within that. I often say that most managers, when I grew up, like they did one of three things to try and get you to do something. They either used the old carrot or the stick, or then they take you out and get pissed and see if they could find out what the problem was and then try to resolve it from there. I'll tell you,
get drunk for the Americans.
The third ones didn't often work, but there's lots of nuances in between and as to how you can get the best out of somebody. And also, if you lead from the front, people will follow you once they see that you're actually got, first of all, an idea and a vision of what you want to be. And a lot of people are very risk averse around wanting to put objectives on a wall and saying, we in 6 months' time will decide whether we were successful by whether we hit these 1, 2, 3, 4 very, measurable goals. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to say that because that's what you would do in sports. If you don't win, then you're not being successful. You're not performing. Or if you're not performing, then what have we got to do to be able to perform and be successful?
It sounds like you were very deliberate at every step of the way. And what I mean by deliberate is, if you had a goal, you figured out what you needed to do to accomplish that goal. And so you were executing against it. Even you kind of brushed over, but I do want to highlight it. When you were winning that business, let's say with Toyota, when you moved to Australia, you guys figured out, even if you had to pretend to be a student to get some data for the client to show them what they might not know to try to win that business, to have conversations with 100 stakeholders across the business. That's real work. And oftentimes when we meet with early stage entrepreneurs, or actually even salespeople at established companies, they might ask, well, why is it so hard? People don't want to buy my product, but it is supposed to be hard. It's difficult to convince somebody of the value, and you have to put in the hard work. And people have options in the end of the day. So if you don't, like you said, not leave any stone unturned, then you're not doing enough work, and that's why you're not getting the results that you want. So I think you were very deliberate about that, and that probably was, quote unquote, your superpower is, when you were in a sales role trying to win business, you were proactive about it. When you were stuck in or positioned into a leadership role, you not only helped through your soft skill motivate other people, but also you led by example and actually did the work as well. But over the years, until you were 32 years old, and we'll get to the part where you actually moved to Australia and got that opportunity, how did your role evolve? Did you end up running that team of 900?
No, there was a global CEO that were sitting above me, and this guy called Michael Murphy, who is still a good friend today. And he calls me occasionally from his flat in Richmond. He's now a consultant, fantastic guy, and had a CEO for our UK business called Loretta, who's also very much a big supporter of mine. And certainly they and others really helped me with my career development, kept giving me opportunities and putting me forward for, industry awards as well, and felt that I was a sort of beacon that they could showcase to other young people in our business that anything is possible. You can do whatever you want if you put your mind to it. I mean, I'm a big believer, and a lot of people that work with me get to hear me say this a lot, but you can teach skills, you cannot teach attitude. And it's all about having the right attitude, because generally when someone's coming to the business, they've got the basic motor skills to do the job, but what makes them different is their attitude to it. And so every day, if you've got that attitude that you can be a better version of what you were yesterday, you will continually improve. And if you're just going to come in and just spin your wheels, then, go and work somewhere else, because I don't want to work with you. We need to be constantly evolving, particularly in our business, which changes so rapidly and all the time. I spend more time here than I do with my family. So, why would I want to come in and just do an average job, or just come in and just do the job? I want to do something else. And also in our job, and this is a really big point, in comms and in PR, you can actually change things that are happening in the economy, in society, in your communities. And so actually using your skills that you've learned, and they are genuinely kind of like really incredible skills you've got to be able to influence change. That's why I love the job I do.
And speaking of change, one thing that we've learned through interviewing at this point hundreds of people is that even if you attain a certain level of success early on in your life, you're not guaranteed to keep on getting the same opportunities and keep on elevating and leveling up every single time. Sometimes life pulls a rug from under you in ways you cannot expect. So tell us what happened when you got a call to get the opportunity to run a PR firm in Asia Pacific and you ended up moving to Australia. What happened? Because I think it wasn't exactly what you expected.
No, I was looking to move markets, and I was a bit burnt out, to be honest, and I was looking for something different and something new. And it was for the first time really moving out of the agency I'd been in. I mean, it changed names, but essentially it was the same agency, and some of the people were still the same that I'd worked with. And I was 31, it was the 11th year into my career, and I got this opportunity with a business called Euro RSCG, which was the Havas name before it became Havas. And one of the pieces that I was really interested to get involved in, because at that time, there was a lot of talk around where PR sits, and it was struggling to get into the top table for marketing spend with where the advertising media agencies were making a lot of money. So part of the attraction of Havas was the opportunity to also go and play a leadership role within our advertising and media agencies there, in addition to doing what I knew, which was running PR businesses. And I think that was really, really exciting. Plus, I'm a big traveller, and I'd already backpacked around the world twice and spent a lot of time in Australia. I had a lot of friends who I had played sports with. I played a lot of cricket when I was growing up, and a lot of the guys in Australia do too, and played with a lot of those guys and knew them. And so having backpacked around Australia, loved it. And I thought, you know what, there's one place in the world I'd go and live, because it is the most beautiful place in the world. I want to go and live in Australia. And given the opportunity to run a PR business and a media and advertising agency was, I think, an opportunity I didn't want to pass up.
So what happened when you landed there?
So I finished that. So one of the big reasons I wanted to take on what was the Red Agency then, which was part of the Havas group, which the PR agency, was they were working for Google. And it was a really, really exciting client. I'd done some work for Google in Europe on some issues management between some issues that they were facing in Greece and Turkey. So 3 or 4 months later, I land in Australia. It was Easter, and go into the office after the Easter break, first day, and got showed around. It was fantastic, brilliant. Weather was fantastic outside. This is it, fantastic. Lots of people talking to me about different accounts. It was a very small agency, it was like 9 people. And I said, could someone give me a briefing on Google? And they said, well, we lost Google like 2 months ago. And I was like, nobody had told me. So the one reason I thought that this agency could turn around was based on Google. So anyway, that was off the table pretty much straight away. And so we had to make some changes and reset the whole agency. I knew I was going to have to reset the agency anyway. When you move to a role, there's always skeletons in the closet, but this was frankly a bit of a graveyard. It was a business that was making a big loss, and so it needed a proper reboot. And again, had a lot of fantastic support from the leadership in Havas across the region, and also colleagues in Australia, to be able to turn it around. And turn it around we did it very, very quickly.
So talk about that dynamic, because you came from a 900-person agency, right, effectively, to a 9-person. Very, very different environment. You probably had a lot more opportunity to just kind of drive things in the direction that you wanted to drive. But how did your job change then? And what did you do in those coming years to pull them out of that loss?
So we are a French headquartered business, and when you're far away from the mothership, it's kind of like, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You can do what you want because no one can see you. And yet they really you don't really have an idea of what's going on elsewhere in the world because you're so far away. So that also meant you couldn't really rely on anything else coming. It wasn't like they were going to start sending us work from the centre. It just didn't happen. So I guess your entrepreneurial spirit kicks in, and you I guess sort of get back down to 101 with how you're going to reset and run an agency. And I was very used to running agencies, and an entrepreneurial spirit is kind of very much inherent in me, and decided that I was going to go out and meet as many people as I could. I had connections already in Australia through sports and also through other people I knew, having been in my previous role, who connected me with people. So I actually arrived with 2 accounts already. So I already was bringing money with me, but then I just had to trust some of the people around me. I had a very young team, and a lot of those young team members stayed with me for quite some time as we started to kick goals, win business, win awards, and it just kind of spiraled from there. And I guess the rest is history. Within 7 years, we were about 110. We were making a lot of money. We'd taken on, the agency group had gone across Asia. We'd gone into Singapore. We're about 30 staff in Singapore. We had people in Philippines. We've got a PR team in Vietnam and a team in Indonesia.
One of the things that we like to do on this show, especially for folks that are not familiar with certain industries, is to try to get an understanding of what does it actually mean to win business, and what are the size of those accounts. So when you're coming in there, you're starting with a business with a loss. What were the type of contracts you were getting? How big were they dollar-wise? How many of them were you able to get in that, let's say, first year?
This, bear in mind, I was coming from working for, I just launched the Range Rover Evoque globally, which was a major, design change for that brand. And it was the entire KPI was get this car on the front page of Design Week. Multi-million-dollar account, to essentially trying to pick up $3,000 or $4,000 a month accounts. $30,000-$40,000 a year. And that's where I had to start, because that was what was there. And there was a couple of accounts we won very early on that stayed with me all the way till I left recently. And even though they never really changed in terms of the size. And why was that? And I always get this question from the guys in Paris. If they hadn't spent that fucking money with us, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I'm a huge person around loyalty. And I will always be aware of people that have been loyal to us, whether they're clients, suppliers, colleagues, whatever. And I think, we will give them the same level of service that we gave them always, because, they trusted us. And actually, one of those businesses did start to grow as well with us. It was a Spanish business called Cosentino, and they ended up spending about 3 or 4 times the amount. But I reckon that account was probably $3,500 when it started, a month. And they were entering the market. We were a bit of a challenger. We tried to position ourselves as a challenger brand, a challenger agency. They were a challenger into that market. And they grew with us, and I think there was lots of examples of that.
One of the things that we talked about in our pre-interview is the interesting dynamic of your role, where you were in Australia, you were starting all these different business units across Asia, and every country that you would go into, there'd be slightly different dynamic, different culture, obviously, but also different business culture as well. Talk about that a little bit. How did you figure out, let's say, how to start a new business unit in a new country where you didn't really know anybody and you didn't know this is how they do business there?
Well, I traveled a lot in my time. I think I said I traveled the world twice. I'd gone and done charity treks in all sorts of different parts of the world. I was big into big into that for a long time, and so I knew something about their markets. Either I traveled there, or I'd got on to learn about it. And I think having that kind of knowledge of having either traveled their country or knowing something about them that was interesting was quite important, because a lot of it in Asia in particular is all about relationships and respect. And so, you're going in there and also not trying to give them the way you want it to work, but actually listening and actually seeing, well, actually, how can it work here under the environment in which they are used to operating. That's not to say you can't evolve that or change that, but you've got to be very respectful of the way in which business is done, the way in which culture and society works, and going in there, yes, with a point of view, but also with the understanding that you're going to have to be flexible around that, because it's a different market. Where I grew up, which was, we were doing a lot of work into the US, Western Europe, and then Hong Kong, Singapore, there are a lot of differences about those markets, but there's also a lot of things that are the same. You go into Indonesia, it's very different. You go to Japan, it's very different to that. There are still things that are the same, but there's a lot less that is the same. So I just think you've just got to be very aware of the people that you work with and the environment in which they've got to operate.
I mean, I think it's becoming clear to me that part of the reason why you got the opportunities you did at a young age and why you were able to win business in a completely new environment is because of how attentive you are about people, their cultures, their norms, what they want, and how they expect to be treated. And I think that's a great takeaway for anybody in this room. If you make it a point to get to know people, you will be able to win business from them. And then we actually heard that from one of your clients, Andrew Glincher and Nixon Peabody, where he would meet a lot of clients by volunteering and actually being friends with them first, right? And so I want to fast forward to your time here, because you have been named to this role to run Red Havas, or global CEO of Red Havas, Havas PR, across the world. You started in July, but you've been here since January running this. And it's clear to me why you got this opportunity. You were able to build a massive business from scratch in Asia. But talk to us about this new concept that you guys just announced yesterday. It's merged media, but to somebody just reading it in the news or seeing the wonderful promo video that we just saw, we might not quite quickly pick up on what that means. So from the perspective of a client, if I am even, let's say, an entrepreneur or a business leader that is just thinking about spending some money on PR right now, and I might be spending $5-10 grand a month with you, what should I be looking for in the PR company? What does merged media mean now?
I'm always fascinated by our own obsession as an industry across marketing, communications, advertising, media, digital, PR, whatever, around where the future is and what the future of the industry is, and which one of those agency kind of disciplines, if you like, will be most successful. The reality is the future is promised to no one. So you've got to go out there and take it. So to me, the PR world has always been experts in the earned media side. We earn the conversations for our clients, whether that's through media or through other channels.
Sorry, to clarify for folks that might not be aware that are listening, earned media meaning news, TV, articles, and on the press, etc.
Yeah, so getting your stories into the news agenda in different ways, and so that's fine, but that's really only part of what we do anyway. And certainly the whole world is becoming more and more integrated. And to a consumer who is consuming information about a brand, let's say it's about Coca-Cola, for example, you don't sort of as a consumer go, well, Coke is talking to me through a Facebook page, or Coke is talking to me through the news channel, or Coke is talking to me through a newspaper article. It's Coke, right? That's the experience you're having. It's one story to them. So media is also merging so quickly that you're consuming media in multiple channels, often now at the same time. Think about how many times you're sort of on your phone whilst you're watching TV, or you're listening to the radio, or even potentially even like on conference calls or whatever. People are consuming media all the time. Now, how do you make your story relevant and meaningful in this media world that's all merging into one? And so that's where we are looking to really drive the work that we're doing. And that means that we also want to get into the driving seat more often in the owned media of the clients. But by owned media, we're talking about the channels in which a client is using to inform their stakeholders about news and stories that they have. So, most brands now obviously have a website, they have social channels, they'll be hosting events and conferences. Those are all their channels in which they own, that they can talk to a stakeholder. And if you think about it, if you're doing that, you're actually releasing your news through that. So essentially, you're a news brand. And I think that newsrooms that are becoming smaller and smaller in traditional media houses are actually moving out of media houses and into PR agencies. Because in essence, if we're managing all of those channels, as well as the earned component, we're essentially becoming a newsroom.
What does that mean, though, for a client? I mean, should I decide to use, for example, a digital agency or a PR agency or a content agency? How do I know who to use now that the lines are blurring?
So I think, for us, it's about, we want to go out there and prove the model. And, we've got fantastic examples of that in Australia in particular. We've got a couple of examples of now in the US. We're making investments into those types of roles and different disciplines and specializations you need in the agency to be able to do that work. And I think, we want to get in a room and actually talk to people about how we're set up. And I think they'll be able to see the value of that. The reality is, for a lot of clients at the moment, they're using a lot of different agencies to do parts of that. Now, there are inefficiencies in it, partly because that usually means that they're not talking to each other as regularly. So information is sometimes going out not quite on message, if you like. Mm-hmm. But also there's inefficiencies in the fact that they're having to brief 4 different agencies about 4 different things. And so that also becomes a frustration. And that's just some of the things I've heard from my clients who are also trying to transform their own business in this sort of world of real-time news and real-time breaking news, if you like. So how can we help them? That's our job now, is to prove that service is one that they want.
Interesting. So clearly the space is evolving and changing, and part of that is because the way that we communicate is changing and the way that we consume content is changing as well. And you here are helping Havas basically take on that and provide those services for your clients. But over the next handful of years, how do you think, for the folks in this room, how do you think their jobs will change? Or more importantly, I guess, taking a step back and looking through your career and what you've been able to do, there's obviously going to be a lot of opportunities now going forward as well in this business. What advice would you give to the people in this room for how they can take advantage of these opportunities and continue to grow and progress in their careers?
You've just got to be open to change and also really embrace it. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because things are changing all the time. I mean, the first couple of years of my career, the mailroom was the hub for a PR agency. You spent all your time stuffing envelopes, sending faxes, and that was like a world away from where it is today. There are skills that are still very much the same in terms of understanding communication strategy and problems and how you will tackle them with clients. It's just that actually then how you execute it is changing. So learning about that and learning how that opportunity can work for you is I think something that's really exciting about the work that we do. We're in a public relations business. We're an agency that's highly creative, that's thinking about solutions for clients. It's a fun place to work. So take it not as a challenge in that way, but take it as a fun challenge. This is a fantastic sort of industry that's evolving and changing all the time, and that's not the same for other industries that are potentially either dying or struggling to transform. I think we've got all of the tools in our armory to transform. And particularly us at Havas, who we're owned by a large group, Vivendi, where we've got access to some of the world's most fantastic entertainment brands. We have the world's biggest music company in Universal Music. We've got world's biggest mobile gaming company in Gameloft. We've got fantastic experience in TV and film through Canal Plus and Studio Canal. Those and access to that kind of way, the entertainment and data and talent that they've got is fantastic for us, because of course we're also trying to entertain audiences with the stories of the brands that we work for.
So as a final parting thought, and I think that's actually incredibly helpful, being open-minded and open to change, but even more specifically, what would it take for you to notice someone in the organization and try to help elevate them through the ranks?
I think that knowing that they're going further and not just working hard, but like coming with ideas and presenting them in not just as I've got this idea, but actually it's got some meaning and thought behind it. I think that often will pull someone out of the pack straight away, particularly if they've also, that other people around them, their line managers, are saying this is somebody we need to look out for. In our presentations we have to give back to Paris, they often ask us, name us your 3 members of staff that you want to look after. And then, with KPI, whether they're still here in a year's time. And actually you start going down the chain and you actually ask, practice groups or offices to do the same thing. Those are the 3 people. It might be 3, it might be 5, whatever it is, depending on the size of your business. But if they are the people that will move the needle for your agency, and we're all about talent, our best and greatest assets walk in and out of the building every day. We're not selling a commodity. We are selling ideas and strategy. If you're keeping the best people, then you'll be a success. I often say in very simple terms, when you're running an agency, there are 3 steps. The first is hire and retain the best talent. If you do that, the second step is you'll do great work. And then if you do that, the third step is you should be a success. And don't do the second or third step until you get the first one right. And so we're all about talent. So I talk a lot about really, supporting and helping people, and also recognizing that some people will leave your agency. Don't ever make them an enemy. I'm very happy if people think that their future is elsewhere. Support them, be supportive of that. Might not necessarily always agree with it, but there's a number of team members that I've had in my time who left the agency and then come back because actually they realized the opportunity was much stronger for me here, just that actually maybe we weren't as mature as we were when they then came back, because they just potentially thought it was going to be too hard to get to the vision that I was setting for the agency. But that's for them. I've never made an enemy in this business, and I don't feel like there was any reason to. Yeah.
I think that's great insight. And I mean, you said yourself that throughout your career, sometimes you'd be working for somebody, sometimes that same person would be working for you. I'm sure later on, as you went on to other roles, you'd recruit people to work with you again. And so when you're high quality talent, people do notice. I'm sure even people sitting in this room, you can probably think of one or two people that you just love to work with because they get things done. And guess what? Your bosses are doing the same thing when they're reporting back to Paris. They're sitting down, they're talking about who are the 3 to 5 people that we should look out for, because they're going through that same kind of mental exercise of figuring out who can we elevate, who can we maybe put into a specific role so they can help us solve these problems. So I think that's a huge thing to keep in mind.
And I'm presuming I was one of them during my career, and yet I probably wouldn't have known. But then when I look back at how I did it, and then I started to see how they were doing it, it was like, well, completely makes sense. So that's your high performers.
Yeah, it's safe to say that you were, James. You wouldn't end up here. But it's been really great having you part of the show. I think there's a lot of great takeaways for everybody here as well. James Wright, we wish you the best of luck here in New York City. Hopefully it's as cool as London and Australia, but at the very least we have all the seasons.
Yes, that's right. All right, so James, thanks again for coming on the Mentors, but we'd love to open it up to the folks in this room. That's part of the benefit of doing a live event, is you all get to ask questions directly to the people sitting in front of you here. So anyone have any questions for James?
What's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given from a mentor or a manager?
The best piece of advice I got actually was from one of my old sports coaches, which was to back yourself, because if you don't, no one else will. It's like you cannot expect anybody to back you if you're not backing yourself. I think that's really, really important, that you've got to, if you believe you're good enough and you've got the skills, then back yourself to go and deliver. I also had a very, very great piece of advice from one of my old bosses in London, who was talking about pitching, and his advice was, once you've sold, shut up. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an absolute brilliance in that. People tend to oversell or be very frightened of silence, particularly in pitch situations. So they'll make a point, and then there'll be silence, and they'll remake the point and continue to remake the point until some of that sort of like silence has gone away. There's an absolute brilliance in being able to deliver a sales pitch really concisely and simply, and then allowing it to sit in the room. And then I would add to that today is trust your client or the potential client to have heard what you've said, and let them process it.
That's such a great piece of advice, and in particular in our world in startups, when you're selling a product that's not quite finished yet, it's very difficult to know what the client wants. So your job as a salesperson or as an executive is to learn as much as you possibly can about the client and what they need, and then try to serve them something so that hopefully they buy it. And sometimes when you talk too much, or when you close the deal and you still keep on selling, you shoot yourself in the foot by proposing something that they never cared about.
Yeah, exactly.
And now they're like, well, maybe this isn't the right product or solution for us. And so I think that's
I was looking through an email of an entrepreneur that I advised last week, actually, and he has a bunch of clients now, and he's generating revenue, but he's just not as good at sales. He leveraged his own relationships to get the initial deals. But I was looking through his emails, and he reached a really important person. And in the email, you could see she was bought in, and then you could see he started overselling after she was already bought in. She was ready for the meeting, and then she ghosted him. She never responded again, because clearly he came off a little desperate. So there is power in silence, and sometimes taking a step back and realizing that you probably already communicated the value. That's great advice. Any other questions? We have time for one or two more.
James, you do a ton of travel. We all know that. How do you go about balancing your complex travel schedule and also your personal life and your family?
I try to make as much time as I can when I can, and I'm actually someone who's quite restless. I don't like sitting around doing nothing. But I always try to have, when I'm traveling, at least a sort of a half an hour every day. It's actually, you won't see it 'cause it's private in my diary, where I phone my children, and I'll speak to them on FaceTime, which is, work sometimes, depending on where they're fighting. And so I try to make that sort of time. And I think technology has really helped with that. I mean, obviously, I think also when you're traveling so often, I've also got really good at, when I'm then with them in person, being completely with them. And so trying as hard as I can to ensure that the time I've got with them is not sort of interrupted by other stuff at work. And so that might mean I have to get up at 5 a.m. and work for a couple of hours before they get up because I'm on holiday. And literally, in my role, you're never really on holiday. Someone's always phoning you, someone's always messaging you. There's some kind of bomb going off somewhere that you need to sort of help resolve. And then, again, I'll rather take calls and do calls late into the evening, or catch up on emails, and to ensure that I've spent that time with them. I don't think there's any kind of silver bullet. I certainly don't spend enough time with them as I would like. But, you try to do the best you can do, and as good a piece of advice as I could give you.
Yeah, I think as long as you put in the effort, then that goes a long way.
So if you had to put in a hierarchy in order of importance, what would you rank first? People skills, knowledge, or initiative? What's most important in your mind?
I don't know about hierarchy, but you just actually remind me of something I did a while ago, which was when I left Australia, they put together a video, and the word that came up a lot was the compassion and getting to know and understand people and supporting them no matter what was going on. And often I'm aware of things that are happening in people's lives that others in the agency wouldn't be aware of, simply because we need to be aware of when we're running a business. And I always took the effort. And, someone was saying, mention TLC. And I'd written an article a while before that around how this 10 to 11 care is actually really important to how you are as a person. But then actually there was a different type of TLC in business management, which is temperament, leadership, and confidence. And so temperament's a huge thing, I think, in business. You really get to know somebody's character when they're under pressure. And I think, having somebody who has that right temperament when there looks like there's a massive issue that's exploded, or there's a huge problem, and actually having somebody who actually can come across as very, very much kind of measured and even-handed around that situation, and is willing to take a step back and actually take a breath. And often that comes with experience. I'm used to it so often that you'll see sort of other people around you kind of like frightened about what's going to go on, and we all going to lose our jobs and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, things are never as bad as they appear. And then leadership is key, and that's really when I say, leading from the front. And you can lead from the front as an intern. That's not just about doing what you do in your job. It might be about shutting down staff gossip, or just not taking part in that kind of things, or wanting to say, actually, there's a job to be done that's not great, but I'm willing to actually put my hand up and say, actually, I'll come and help do that. And I think leadership you can find in all quarters. And then confidence, and confidence is important because we all have self-doubt. But you've got to be confident in what you're doing and how you're going to go about doing it. And again, confidence in a respectful way is a hugely important thing, I think, for me. I love working with people who are confident about where we're going and what we're doing. Because if they're not confident, either I'm not doing my job, or if I'm not confident about it, then we've got a real problem. So confidence is important. So I think, both TLC and TLC in the two different ways I've defined it, I think are really important when you're, growing your career, but also growing as a person, because you're growing as a person every day in your career.
I love that piece of advice. I'll add something as well, that confidence is not always natural for everyone. And sometimes in the beginning of your career or in certain situations, you have to pretend at first to be confident to gain that real confidence a little bit later on. Because yes, once you maybe even pretend, you inspire confidence in somebody else, and their belief in you then in turn makes you more confident about yourself. So sometimes you have to play a little bit of mind tricks on yourselves, but I think that's such an important piece of advice for everybody here in this room.
Yeah, and taking a step back as well, this reminded me of a story. I'm reading right now a book called Titan. It's John D. Rockefeller's story, and what he's really known for is he was always able to keep cool and have composure. And that is actually a big asset, because stressful things do happen, but a lot of times they're in our heads more stressful, or there might be more problems that arise from it than they actually are. And your ability to take a step back, be cool, and actually think about how to solve the problem versus freaking out about it is a big asset as well. But that does come, I think, with some experience as you gain that confidence over time.
We always had the joke that, this is PR, not ER. And it's sometimes worthwhile just remembering that.
Cheers.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to the show. James, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.